I'll bet he likes to pick a scab, too. Hi, I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, President Donald Trump this week did an exclusive interview with George Papadopoulos from ABC News, and apparently decided...
I'm sorry. When you said ABC News, are you referring to the guy who was the Bill Clinton campaign manager who now is an unbiased journalist, that one?
Exactly. Very unbiased.
Yeah, okay.
Totally unbiased. Sure. So anyway, during the course of the interview, President Trump decided to wax eloquent on the idea of what might happen if somebody came to him now and offered opposition research, somebody he knew to be from a foreign government, perhaps even Russia or China, and would he call the FBI or would he take the meeting, essentially? And the president said he'd take the meeting. Maybe he'd do both. Maybe he'd call the FBI if he thought something was wrong with it, but he'd take the meeting. It's Oppo research, he repeated about 6 or 7 times in 2 sentences. Bill, is this just something that the guy can't let go? He's just not psychologically capable of saying, you know what, I don't think we should talk about this, or it's an active legal matter, or anything like that.
Who brought it up?
That is unclear. I'm sure Papadopoulos did, though. I'm sure George asked him the question. But there's a difference, Bill, between who brought it up and how much depth you go into in talking about it.
Correct. Well, this one's a little tough to kind of parse because I don't really know the full, not that much of the details as the scope of everything. But I'll give you what my first reaction is. As a man who, by all accounts, now looking at the objective evidence of a $50 million plus investigation that took 2 years, utterly not only slandered but libeled his presidency to date and so on. I wouldn't be the kind of person who would forget that very quickly, and I wouldn't be the kind of person to forgive it very quickly either. One of the reasons he may have said that is because those of us that still believe in justice, we're willing to have the Mueller report come back and have Donald Trump, if he was guilty of impeachable crimes and misdemeanors, be in favor of removing him from office only because this is how the country runs and is supposed to run. But it makes me suspect that now that threat has fizzled out, that there are going to be a flood of people who are going to be eager to trade any information they may have on Hillary Clinton or James Comey or any of these scoundrels in exchange for immunity, which of course Donald Trump can't really provide. But basically what he's saying, I think, is that it sounds to me like he's more thinking like a CEO, which of course he is. He's the chief executive officer of the United States. I think what he's basically saying is, if you've got something really juicy, I want to see it. And if it looks like it's something illegal, then I'll turn it over to the FBI.
Well, he just spent 2 years or more telling all of America and anyone who would listen that there was, in his terms, no collusion. In other words, there was no conspiracy to influence the 2016 election between him, his campaign, and anybody in Russia or any other foreign entity. And right. It seems from these latest comments on ABC News that what he's basically saying is, well, even if there had been some cooperation there, it wouldn't have been such a bad thing, and I might take the meeting now. And here's his quote, by the way. He says, when asked if he would hand it over to the FBI or he would take the information, he said, I think maybe you do both. I think you might want to listen. There isn't anything wrong with listening. If somebody called from a country, Norway, and said, we have information on your opponent, I think I'd want to hear it. Now, of course, Bill, we're not talking about Norway. And it just seems like either the president just is tone deaf to this whole issue and what it looks like, or there's something else going on that the average American can't possibly understand in his brain.
Well, again, to say that Trump suffered from 2 years of accusations of collusion with the Russians, what we find from the Mueller report is he didn't collude with the Russians. That doesn't mean that nobody colluded with the Russians, and I have a face in mind. So again, if I've been wrongly accused of something by somebody, that does not endear me to that person in any way. If I then find, after 2 years of investigation into my so-called misdeeds, and I come out so at the very least proven, not provable, not guilty, and then somebody tells me, that stuff that they accused you of, well, they're doing it too. I would have a high level of interest in information of that kind.
Well, this is a point, in fact, a sort of a reverse conspiracy theory thing that was raised by one of our members on the exclusive Bill Whittle member blog today, and he was quoting other people, is basically saying Trump is laying a trap for Hillary Clinton. He's basically wanting to bring this subject up and talk about the idea of getting opposition research from a foreign entity, because not only did the Democrats and ostensibly Hillary Clinton get opposition research in the form of the Steele dossier, as it's known, but in fact, they paid for that research. They went hunting for it. It wasn't brought to them. And so this is the too clever by half theory that says President Trump is actually bringing this up because he wants to talk about this in order to entrap Hillary Clinton in the same kind of thing.
Well, I don't know if it's so much to entrap Hillary Clinton. I think she did a pretty good job of that herself. I think what Donald Trump might be doing here is he might be signaling that he is unwilling to concede the loss that the left put him in a sort of a paradox for. Let me clarify that, because that didn't make a whole lot of sense. It's my firm belief that when Hillary Clinton lost, I don't think she expected to lose. I don't think anybody in the deep government expected her to lose. But when she lost, I think she realized within a couple days, takes a little while to dry out, that to accuse Donald Trump of collusion with the Russians would do two things. It would smear his three things. It would smear his campaign and his win. It would tarnish his win. Number two, it would explain her inexplicable loss. And most importantly here, especially now as we get deep into this endgame, most importantly, I think that Hillary Clinton and the rest of them decided that by preemptively accusing Donald Trump of collusion with Russia, they were trying to immunize themselves against the what I think is obvious collusion that Hillary Clinton, the Clinton Foundation, actually did with Russia. In other words, if I accuse you of something heinous, let's say I accuse you of being a wife beater, and then after 2 years of investigation, turns out that there's no evidence for that, and then that person comes back and accuses me of being a wife beater, I can say, geez, how childish is this, I mean, how petulant is this? When in point of fact, I was the wife beater all along, and I accused you of it so that I could basically pull this sense of inoculation, sort of a immunization against charges that I knew were coming. I don't mean legal immunization. I mean sort of.
So you're saying this is the behavior that the Clinton people may have engaged in, basically making the accusation that Trump was involved in something that, in fact, the Clinton camp was.
Well, I don't think that's an unreasonable assumption, Scott, and let's take a look at why that doesn't seem to be unreasonable. The main reason it doesn't seem to be unreasonable is because Robert Mueller couldn't find anything. So for them to level those charges to the degree that they did, I mean, Hillary Clinton, 3 or 4 days after the election, essentially, and when I say essentially, I don't mean she kind of danced around the issue. She said, without actually saying, that the election was stolen from me by the Russians because Donald Trump's a traitor. That was the message, and that was the narrative, and that was what went out, and that's what we dealt with for 2 years. And no matter how much people look at the Mueller report and don't find any evidence, there is a huge percentage of the population, probably 30, 40%, maybe higher, which is utterly convinced that this actually happened. This fantasy that they spun, they're absolutely convinced that Donald Trump is a traitor colluded with the Russians. Okay, so on one level, it bought him a couple of years of time and tarnished Donald Trump as, and that was a big win for them. But what these people may have been doing, as I say, was if you're going to accuse him of something, and you know that there's no evidence because you launched the investigation, you're the one who argued for the investigation. Hillary Clinton's the one who said he colluded with Russia. She knows that he didn't because he didn't, and if she would know, she would know. So obviously, the entire motivation for launching this strategy was not because they had evidence that Donald Trump colluded. There wasn't any. So why would they do it? And why would they pick Russia? I think the reason that they would pick colluding with Russia, as I say, is because this is where Hillary Clinton goes from being unpleasant to being felonious. And I think this is an attempt to make any follow-up attempt on the part of Donald Trump to accuse Hillary Clinton of crimes, which probably consists primarily of collusion with Russians. I think it is designed to make it look like an emotional, childish, petulant reaction, which is pretty much exactly how you set up the question today. Like he was being a little baby.
So Papadopoulos explicitly staged it by saying, wouldn't you...
We're talking about Stephanopoulos?
Wouldn't you... sorry, did I say Papadopoulos?
Yeah, several times.
I think I said it several times. Sorry.
Yeah.
My apologies to that good and decent human being, George Papadopoulos.
And also to George Stephanopoulos. Yeah.
And to George Stephanopoulos and Snuffleupagus. So this, when he posed this question, it was basically a dichotomy. He said, do you take the meeting and listen? Do you hear the dirt that somebody's offering to you, or do you go to the FBI? Those were the options that he presented in framing the question.
It's a false choice.
You always know that when a journalist frames a question like that, he's not asking for a third answer. He's asking for one of these two choices, and you may not want to grab a hold of either one. In this case, Donald Trump grabs both of them, and let me read you what he said there. He says, somebody comes up and says, hey, I have information on your opponent. Do you call the FBI? I'll tell you what, I've seen a lot of things over my life. I don't think in my whole life I've ever called the FBI. In my whole life, you don't call the FBI. You throw somebody out of your office. You do whatever you do. Oh, give me a break. Life doesn't work that way. It sounds to me like the president is betting that most Americans realize that we live in a gossipy society that cannot not listen to the gossip. And once you have done so, couldn't possibly stand up and publicly repent and say, hey, look, I took this meeting. I shouldn't have been tuning into this gossip. Here's what I found out to some law enforcement office.
Well, let's look at who's really doing the dissembling here, and let's look at who really is the person who can't let things go. The way you've described the situation, George Stephanopoulos basically said, if this information were to come to your attention, would you take the meeting or would you call the FBI? It's a false choice. I would take the meeting and I would call the FBI. And if I am being offered sensitive information and somebody says, Mr. Trump, I have information for you that may prove that Hillary Clinton is in fact guilty of all the things she accused you of, what am I going to say? Hey, don't tell it to me, go tell it to the FBI. Is that what I'm going to say? No, I'm going to function as a chief executive. I'm going to function as the guy who's in command of this organization. And I am going to listen to what this person said. Now, if listening to what this person said were to lead to evidence of crimes or evidence of treasonous activity or anything like that, and then Donald Trump did not contact the FBI, then you would have a case. But since that didn't happen, and since I don't think it would happen, you don't.
Well, here's, I think, what people want to hear, though.
It's a trap that has been set up to essentially get Donald Trump to say that, no, I wouldn't look at any evidence of somebody else's collusion, which is precisely what the campaign manager for the Clinton run number one would want to hear. He wants to hear Donald Trump make a commitment that he's not going to look at any evidence that may come in, as we say, over the transom, right? But the evidence that comes in over the transom may actually be a real evidence. The problem with the accusations against Donald Trump was that this Steele dossier, this so-called evidence of collusion, wasn't true. I mean, that's ultimately the problem with it. It paid for or whatever. You can look at the provenance of it. You can look at how questionable Steele is and all the rest. But the bottom line is, if that information that was offered to Hillary Clinton's campaign contained actual truth, then we'd be in a whole different boat. So it didn't. So if you're looking at it that way, when Donald Trump says, yeah, I take the meeting, what he's basically saying is this: either the guy's a nut and I just tell him to get out of the office, or he's a dangerous nut, in which case I call the FBI, or he's got something that has some ring of truth to it. Now, if Donald Trump were to then go and on his own, or using, let's say, even the Republican National Committee to investigate this stuff, then he'd be as guilty as Hillary Clinton was. But that's not what he said. He said, I'd take the meeting. As I said earlier, I think this is the most important thing. If I've got an envelope or something and I say, I have to deliver this envelope personally to Donald Trump. Not President Trump, CEO Trump. This envelope is worth potentially hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, and I have to hand it directly to Donald Trump, or else I'm going to tear it up. If Trump hears about this, what has he got to do? Again, businessman Trump, which is what he is. He's going to look at it and he's going to say to himself, or he's going to say to his assistants, how credible does the guy seem? Is he wearing clothes? Does he have pants on? Does he seem like the kind of person who might have that? And if it turns out that the person seemed to have a minimum level of credibility, I suspect a person like that would say, okay, you got 15 seconds. You're in the room. You got 15 seconds. I take the envelope, I shake it to make sure there's no powdery substances in there. I open it up, I take a look at it. And if it turns out that what's inside it has real interest or real value, then I'll have a little more time with the guy. If not, I'll kick him out.
Well, Bill, you're only presenting a couple of the scenarios. I think that, most Americans, although they probably don't engage in this kind of experience themselves, have seen enough movie and TV show scenes like this that here's what they would expect. The good guy goes to the FBI and says, look, the Russians have just asked for a meeting with me. They are promising me opposition research on my opponent. Do you want me to take that meeting and wear a wire? Do you want me to report back to you? Because if the good guy doesn't do that, then he goes to the meeting first and all of a sudden he's implicated. He's in with them and he didn't pre-clear that with law enforcement. Not that you have to pre-clear things with law enforcement all the time, but he is now one of the people who are involved in the crime instead of one of the people who first went to law enforcement and said, hey, this smells bad. How would you like me to handle this?
So are you really suggesting by this line of argument that when Donald Trump says I take the meeting, he would take the meeting in a dumpster out in back of a 7-Eleven someplace? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I'm not suggesting that at all.
Okay,
what
well
I'm
then, so what
I'm
you're
suggesting
saying, no, so what I'm
is that
suggesting
he should
is,
have gone to the FBI and said, hey, this doesn't look good. I think it may be ethically or legally questionable. Do you want to? He knew that these people were being investigated. So he already knew there was a problem with Russia. Why not touch base with the FBI first?
There is an enormous difference, Scott, as you may or may not be aware, between President Trump and CEO Trump. CEO Trump, who agreed to meet in a dark alley someplace with somebody who had potentially felonious intent of any kind, you could argue, although I don't really see the argument, to be honest with you, that, okay, now he's involved with it. But when President Trump is asked a question like this, which is a stupid question, it's an obviously stupid question. And as I said, it's designed to be a trap. Would you or wouldn't you? Well, I would do both. So what I'm saying is this. If Donald Trump is saying, yeah, I take the meeting, then what he's saying is, I would spend whatever amount of personal time it took, 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever, to grant the audience to the people who are offering the information, who are not going to simply hand it to the FBI and hope that they give it to me. But to say that he would do that in secret is just nuts. I mean, it's just nuts. If he were to do it, there is no place that Donald Trump ever spends any time ever where he is not surrounded by Secret Service agents, where he's not surrounded by, I have a reasonable assumption that the Oval Office has some sort of recording device in it. I would be really quite surprised if it didn't. So what's happening again and again, is that the left is using this journalism kind of an ambush to cast aspersions on a man who simply said he would do something that seems exceedingly reasonable to me, given the realities of the fact that he's the president of the United States. I don't see where the harm is. I really don't.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, 5 days a week, Bill Whittle now brings you the kind of discussion that doesn't just set up straw men so we can knock them over and then pat ourselves on the back for having done it, but actually brings you the arguments and the allegations from the other side so that we can deal with them according to principle and according to our own lights and truth. We know that our members appreciate this kind of programming because they're paying for it. They've gone to BillWhittle.com and they've clicked that Become a Member link. And not only are they involved in the production of some 48 new shows every month, but they're also creating their own member blog, which is dynamic and vibrant and growing every day. And we're grateful to them.
Great new members, just lots of new members have joined in the last several days, and many of them have made comments and introductions that just mind-blowing, just absolutely mind-blowing. They're tremendous people.
Because of the way this website is set up, the more people who join, the better it gets. And it will get much better when you join. So go to BillWhittle.com and click that Become a Member link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making this happen.